In his book, Evolution in Divine Love, Swami Padmanabha writes, "In love, we never have the final say, for love is an open word, a letter that is continuously being written, forever in motion. True love, within its sacred dance, never comes to a halt. The moment love ceases to move, it ceases to be love." Now, there's nothing I love more than a conversation that crackles with life. And that is definitely true about the conversation you're about to hear with Swami Padmanabha. We talked about divine love and its presence everywhere and in everything, about paradox and adventure in God, and about how reading the Bhagavad Gita during an early life existential crisis led this Argentinian Christian onto his path to being a Hindu monk. I hope you enjoy this banquet as much as I did, and if you do, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it. Enjoy. Welcome to The Sacred Everywhere. I'm Dr. Sheri Kling, and in this space we explore how the sacred shows up in real life, in our questions, our struggles, our longing, and our hope. Can we find the sacred in every place and everyone? Let's see. Okay, well, welcome, Swami Padmanabha, to this conversation. I'm really happy to have you here. We've had some conversations before through Process and Faith, and I have read your most recent book and just love your ideas. But before we get into talking about what you have written about in this latest book, Evolution in Divine Love, I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about your journey in terms of how you got to where you are now as a Hindu priest.
Hmm. Thank you, Sherry, and thank you for the invitation and congratulations on pronouncing my name so accurately. Not everyone can do that, so. So how did I get to where I'm now? That's a long journey, as you can imagine. I'm 45 now, and I was born in Argentina, born in a Catholic family. Uh, so I received my baptism and first communion. My mom wanted to be a nun when I was before I was born, of course, when she was young. So I
Right.
carry this religious momentum coming, especially from my mother's side. So in my teenage years, I will say I was into the typical existential crisis that teenage years are made for, basically,
Uh-huh.
with all these existential questions and asking purpose of life and why suffering and what's beyond death. And though I was officially a Catholic, I was always very open to study and read and devour whatever came on my way. At that time, there was no internet, so it was mostly books. So I was really into philosophy, Western philosophy. I read a lot at that time of Nietzsche, at Schopenhauer, and Dostoevsky, and
Hmm.
Argentinian authors and poets. I always loved to read and write. So I started to inquire in different directions. Eventually, I got connected more with the Eastern thought, if you want to put it that way, Buddhism and Taoism, Advaita, Vedanta, different forms of Vedanta. And eventually, when I was, let's say, 17, I got in touch with Bhagavad Gita, which is one of the main books in my
Right.
tradition and many other traditions coming from India, actually. And for me, that was before and after reading that particular book. I already was somehow living a lifestyle quite aligned with the philosophy and the lifestyle proposed by scriptures like Bhagavad Gita, though I didn't know about it. So it was a very
Mm-hmm.
natural connection when I got into that. Also, at the same time, as a teenager, I was a musician. I am a musician, but I was a musician also. At my time, I had two bands playing drums in one, guitar in other.
Oh, wow.
So I was a lot into arts. I loved to write, to paint. It was a big
Yeah.
way for me to express myself. But interestingly enough, in all those artistic circles as a teenager, I never had a girlfriend nor a boyfriend. So it was a very strange thing for me, like what's going on as a teenager. And eventually I came to know I have quite a monastic nature, but at the time
Huh.
that added to my existential crisis as a teenager.
Right.
So yeah, when I was like 18, 19, eventually I visited one of the monasteries of my tradition in Buenos Aires, Argentina, and I met the monks, and I felt immediately like mirrored back, and okay, that's me. And it was like very, very quick, very mystical, I would say. I will say probably
Mm.
there is some momentum coming from previous lives. We consider that possibility in our tradition, previous lifetimes.
Right. Right.
So yeah, that happened like
Yeah.
in 1999. So
Uh-huh.
yeah, and a lot happened till where I am now. But yeah, that
Yeah.
was the
Well,
beginning of the journey. Of it.
I'll just interject real quickly. I often will joke that somehow God must have misplaced my file with the file of the woman who wanted to be the nun, like, confuse the two, because
Mhm.
that was not the path that I thought I wanted to be on, but in much of my life, that was in actual fact kind of the path I was living. And I had a lot of resistance to that, and
Mm.
I still don't think that that was my path, but it's interesting that you say your outer life kind of reflected or pointed toward a journey that you hadn't even yet embraced.
Yeah, yeah. And again, as a musician at that time, as a teenager, I was just thinking, okay, I will be not a rock and roll star, but a musician. I will live doing music. That's an artist.
Mm.
I never thought I will end up being a Hindu monk, but here I am. And somehow, throughout the years, I learned to integrate all those vocations, like music and writing and poetry and
Yeah.
monastic life, and of course,
Right.
what it means to be a monk for me now is very different than what it meant for me 26 years ago. But
Yeah.
still, I keep embracing on a daily basis my vows, but from very different places. So for me, that's the beauty of what it means to embrace a vow and how you can renew it and embrace it from very different places as the years go by.
Yeah. Um, do you remember what it was? Was there a particular aspect of the Bhagavad Gita that really drew you in? Was it, I know it talks a lot about Dharma and one's path and doing what one's Dharma is, but was there
Mm,
was there a particular part of it that
mm,
really struck a note with your core?
mm. Yeah, I could answer in the typical Hindu paradoxical way, yes and no.
Uh-huh.
In the sense that, in one sense, the whole book was like totally like an epiphany for me because and I remember reading the whole book, which at that time the edition I read came with commentary. So that was like
Hmm.
this thick, like almost 1,000 pages book, and I read it like in 2 days, like basically devour it because I was
Wow.
finding, oh, answers to all my questions are coming here, and even answers
Mm.
to questions I didn't have. But now I reading the questions, I realized I should have had those questions. So the whole reading as a whole in those 2 days was like a big, powerful revelation.
Hmm.
But also in terms of specific points and topics in the book in itself, I was initially struck by the emphasis on the eternality of the soul. That was something that created a very, not even rationally, but in a very mystical way. I felt a big, huge relief and reassurance by hearing, yeah, you are eternal, you don't die, and
Hmm.
I felt like the on some degree realization of that truth while reading it. So that
Yeah.
was very, very powerful.
Mm.
And the notion of the divine and the notion of a personal divine that we can relate with through bhakti, which in Sanskrit means basically love or devotion.
Right.
I always longed, having come from studying other spiritual traditions in which the notion of God and how a personal interaction will look like still was a little bit like abstract for me. I felt that in the
Hmm.
Bhagavad Gita, for me at least, it felt a little bit more clear and direct. So that was also
Mm.
something very, very touching for me.
Yeah. Years ago, when I was still living in the Atlanta area, I was part of a group that was like watching like The Power of Myth and talk. It was a just local discussion group connected to the Joseph Campbell Foundation. And so we were doing a lot of things around myth and truth and all of that. And so one of the things we did as a group was watch the Mahabharata
Mm,
movie,
yeah.
which is like a 6-hour movie. I think we did it over the course of 2 or 3 meetings. And then more recently, when I was at Claremont School of Theology, I took a course there on the Bhagavad Gita with a professor named Shukavak Dasa, who
Oh, I
was,
know him.
do you, Canadian-born
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Westerner, and then
I have
also,
a book of him here. He wrote a book, a very interesting book about money, for sure.
yeah, okay.
Okay.
And so in that class, we watched, I think, a portion of that movie again,
Mm,
and what was interesting, and unfortunately my memory fails me here, but what was interesting is, of course, the Bhagavad Gita has that whole scene with the battle and Krishna talking with Arjuna about his duty, his role as a warrior. And it's so difficult to uh embrace that in so many ways, that sense of that this is right and good to enter into this battle. And we were all struggling in the class with, how do we understand this? And all I remember is that later, then I was in the library and found a commentary on the Bhagavad Gita by Ramanuja. And
yeah.
and when I
Srivas.
read it, I thought it answered that question for me, but now I can't remember how. So I'll have to go back and read both
Mm,
again and read
mm,
Ramanuja's commentary, because I remember it crystallized something for me in a way
mm.
that was very strong.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. Ramanuja's commentary is beautiful. And it's interesting that you mentioned Joseph Campbell because I forgot to mention, I mentioned my epiphany with Bhagavad Gita. But before reading that Bhagavad Gita, the first time I ever heard about Krishna, at least in this lifetime, was through a book of Joseph Campbell, actually, which
Really?
was like a compilation of different myths from the East, so to say. And
Mm-hmm.
one of
Mm-hmm.
those was a Leela, we will call in Sanskrit, or divine play of Krishna. And I
Right.
remember reading that book with another friend of mine. Both of us are now practicing Gaudiya Vaishnavas, but we were friends and musicians at the time. And we were both inquiring, and we read this story of Krishna. We were like, there was no internet at the time, so we couldn't Google more about Krishna. So we were like,
Yeah.
whenever you get to know more about Krishna, let me know. And then came this Bhagavad Gita, but in one sense, it all began with Joseph Campbell.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so that on one side, and of course, regarding what you mentioned about how to understand Bhagavad Gita, or even in one sense, we could make the case for any sacred text, because sometimes if we just address the Bible or any text in certain sections, at least through a literal reading, sometimes certain things do not make sense, and we need to resort to a more archetypal, symbolic type of reading.
Right.
So in the Bhagavad Gita, though, in our tradition, we'll acknowledge that as a historical fact that actually happened, but also the text itself renders itself to be read in a more symbolic way, like the two armies, basically, right? Kurus and Pandavas, it represents the dualistic thinking,
Mm.
and
Uh-huh.
dualistic thinking creates battle, creates war. No, the
Ah,
very first verse of the Gita, and probably
right.
Ramanuja mentioned something like that, or many other commentators. There are many commentaries to the Gita, but the very first verse of the Gita speaks about Dhritarashtra, who is asking to Sanjaya, what did my sons and the sons of Pandu did in the battlefield? So he's asking about his people and the other ones,
Right.
but the other ones are the sons of his brother who died. So he
Right.
should feel they are mine as well, but he's saying the other ones. So it's kind of this us and them
Mm-hmm.
pattern. So that's the
Yeah.
first verse of the Gita, kind of setting the stage. This dualistic thinking creates war. And then every
Yeah.
single chapter of the Bhagavad Gita ends in Sanskrit with the word yoga, which means union. So it's kind of the
Right.
rest of the book is an attempt to create union, communion, starting from that initial division, so to say, right? So these are
Right.
some ways in which we can look at the battlefield and the armies and Arjuna having to
Mm-hmm.
face and confront and even kill certain relatives that in many ways embody certain attachments, certain aspects of our sense of identity that need to be released. And
Yeah.
so I think it's important to get to those types of reading of the Gita or any other sacred text
Right.
for it to make sense and be relatable to our own lifestyle, right?
Right. Well, and it's interesting too, because I've recently, and I just did a video on this, just a solo video on this week. But I've recently been in the thick of a big spiritual struggle. I won't get into all the details of it, but What's interesting is then there were like a series of several videos that popped up in my YouTube feed. Of course, I'm sure because I watched one and then, some they know then the algorithm.
Algorithm. Yeah.
Yeah. But the first was with an interview with a woman who's a Hindu priest, and I forget her name, but she just said something about finding the self that does not suffer. And I just thought, oh gosh, I have never experienced the self that does not suffer.
Mm.
And I know about in meditation and contemplation, getting to that point of understanding that who is the one that's doing the thinking and the witness. And, I'm aware of all of that, but I can't say I've ever really experienced that. Um, and then in another video, Richard Rohr was talking about the contemplative mind, the mystical mind, the non-dual mind, about not having to divide the field into either or, and that when we can see God within the woundedness of creation, and even within that which we would label as bad or whatever, that if we can see the core of the divine or the core of goodness in that,
Which
then
you
we
may
can.
call the sacred everywhere.
Exactly, exactly. Then we can see that everywhere. And so yeah, that's just been a very it's just and so anyway, then the end result, well not end result, but then I was listening to Thomas Keating and
Hmm.
one of the things he talked about was that when if we in the Christian tradition, when Jesus takes on all the consequences of human sin and frailty, that when it's said that he descended into hell, one way to understand that is that he went all the way into the psychological condition of utter alienation and utter abandonment. And it was in his surrendering to that then the resurrection then brings the new life out of that.
Hmm.
So all of that was very powerful, but I like you, I have not chosen to pursue a path of Hinduism in my own practice, but I love so much of it. I just resonate so strongly with
Hmm.
so much of the philosophy. So it's just
Yeah.
exciting for me to see those. I'm more of a perennialist.
I mean, you are reading my mind because that's the word that was buzzing in my mind because I was going to say I'm quite of a perennialist myself.
Yeah.
And the more we engage in that exploration, we realize how close we are to each other and how that's why I
Right.
personally don't like to refer so much as other traditions, but more like a sister
Yeah.
traditions to
Yes.
establish the how much of a relative we are to one another rather than there's a thick wall and we have nothing to do, nothing in common. But the more we explore them, the more we realize the commonality, foundational truths that we are sharing. It's like astonishing. There are
Right.
differences, of course. If not, we wouldn't be talking about Christianity and
Right.
Judaism and Islam and this. But still, for me, those differences are exist on the foundation of a non-dual
Yeah.
understanding that all mystical schools share. So at that point, that unity, that oneness, as a foundation, allows diversity to become not like an obstacle, but more like an ornament. I will say,
Right.
like with any relationship, if we don't have enough in common, every difference will be conflict. But if we have enough in
Right.
common, the difference will bring some flavor and taste to the relationship.
Exactly. It's like the salt that flavors the meal. It becomes a joy to observe the diversity and the beauty of other traditions. One of the things in the community in the and process philosophy and theology, when people like David Griffin and John Cobb wrote about deep religious pluralism, one of the things they stressed was entering into conversation with someone from a different tradition with curiosity and with the willingness to be changed by that person's tradition and not just bring your own tools to the party and insisting that I'm just going to hold on to mine and you're going to hold on to yours and maybe we can talk about them, but I'm not going to be vulnerable to what you're teaching in
Yeah,
a way that touches me. And I prefer that attitude of that
totally.
openness.
Totally. Because if not, we may speak about religious or interreligious dialogue. But for me, if I'm not coming to the table, to the conversation with the willingness to be transformed, how much I call that a dialogue or a genuine dialogue and conversation, because any genuine exchange affects each other, transforms each other. So if I already
Yeah.
coming with my agenda, my plan, my assumptions, my fears, I'm in defense, survival mode, defense mechanism,
Hmm.
how much there is a dialogue to begin with. So,
Right, right.
well,
And,
yeah.
and and that really connects too to even to this experience then that I had the other day. I was in a period of silent meditation and was to get out of the the focus, the things that I'm whatever disappointed in about my life, or all the things that I was struggling with. I was then just in that period reminding myself what is happening now, what is happening now, what is happening now, and just then acknowledging, like, in my body, anxiety is happening now, but I don't have to identify with it. I can just
Mm,
say anxiety is happening, or
yeah,
bird song is happening outside, or whatever it
yeah,
is. And then there was this insight that came and said, it's in this now where the sacred is. It's in this now where that living I am is present.
yeah. Yeah, and again, all different traditions will talk about that. Even in Buddhism, you find mindfulness or centering prayer,
Right.
or in our tradition, we have a Sanskrit term called Shakshitva, which will translate into English like witnesshood, something like
Mm,
that, right? Because I
yeah.
cannot say witnessness, witnesshood,
Yeah.
like the act of being a witness. Again, as you say, just witnessing what's going on and not over identifying with the
Right.
experience unto itself. And yeah, from that place you zoom out and you can gain a bigger picture of what's actually taking place. And even as you say, if we feel anxiety or angst, existential angst, crisis of any sorts, for me, I think it's very important to do not isolate ourselves in that experience, because sometimes that's the actual problem. I have a problem and I think I'm the only one that on planet Earth going through this, and that
Yeah.
becomes the actual problem. That amplifies everything else 10 times more. So when we
Right.
can connect to the wound or to the problem or to the crisis as a collective, it's not my problem, it's our problem. Immediately, that's creating communion rather
Mm-hmm.
than rather than isolation. So
Yeah.
because again, I don't want just to say no, just detach from the experience. You are the observer. Okay, yeah, but sometimes we are feeling that and we cannot escape from that. So how to go through that in a way that is not just me going that, because that can bring also guilt and shame in a toxic way and further
Yeah.
isolation. And so, yeah.
Mm. Um,
So you are not
so
alone,
I
Sheri. Welcome to the club of existential crisis.
welcome to the human experience, right?
Yeah.
Like, and the struggle, that I guess one of the pinpoints of the struggle for me has been this difficulty with accepting life as it is, with accepting that it's a mix of tragedy and beauty, and that
Mm,
it just is that,
mm,
and not and getting away from a sort of transactional nature or relationship with the divine, of saying, you know, if I'm good enough, if I perform well enough, if I do everything I'm supposed to be doing, then isn't there some kind of payoff for me?
mhm.
That's been a real,
Yeah.
and for me, it comes out of a whole early life of trauma and like all kinds of reasons that I have that perspective,
Yeah.
but I'm coming right head to head with the failure of that, the
Mm,
failure of that perspective, that that's just not the way it's
yeah.
it
Yeah.
goes.
Yeah, I think the fact that you named your podcast is sacred everywhere now, it's haunting you and, and taking you to confront the
Yeah,
title in 3D,
right.
so to say, which is beautiful. I'm not saying change your
Yeah,
title,
right.
but
No,
yeah, we have to walk the talk. And as much as it's a beautiful concept, it may be hard to embrace it
right.
fully. But at least we know that's how life operates. We need to, as I remember Thomas Merton will say, your salvation begins in the most ordinary moments of your daily life.
Yeah.
No, like when you feel most ordinary, when you feel most ashamed, or salvation begins there. No, don't wait for
Mm,
the otherworldly epiphany and you're floating on the air and you're seeing lights, and all that is beautiful also. But find salvation in the wound, find salvation in uncertainty, in messiness, and it's not easy, but
Mm.
that's how
Yeah.
we really grow and transform.
Right. And like you said, sometimes it's when we do things in the world, like title a podcast "The Sacred Everywhere," then life kind of says, okay, let's get you a little more coherent with what you're state putting out in the world. Let's get you
Yeah,
there.
yeah. Which
So
is beautiful. Again, it's messy, but it's beautiful. And it
it
reminds me again back to the Bhagavad Gita. The very first chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, each one has a name in Sanskrit. The first one is called Vishada Yoga, which basically means the yoga of despair. Because it's when
oh wow.
Arjuna is
Right.
like wanting to leave the battlefield, he feels defeated, he throws his bow on the side, starts to cry. Like he's embracing all his emotions, but it's in one
Yeah.
sense embarrassing because he's the greatest warrior on earth, and there is all this male ego that I'm a warrior, and he's like crying like a baby,
Yeah.
collapsing. So, but the whole thing is that that's the first chapter of the book, like implying
Mm.
really it begins there. The
Mm.
journey
Yeah.
begins in brokenness, in messiness, in embarrassment, and
Mm.
failure, but it's a form of yoga, the Bhagavad Gita will say. It's a form of linking and connecting and bonding.
Mm.
So yeah, I
Yeah.
really appreciate that for that point as well. Like that's part of the foundation, necessary one. So
I love that. I love that. Well, one of the areas that we have of interest or focus that we have in common is, what we could call the process type of traditions or philosophies. Not that you would necessarily link your own perspective directly to Whitehead or process philosophy, but that you write in that way, in that same kind of orbit, like Teilhard de Chardin and other thinkers who stress the dynamic nature of not just our lives, but of the ultimate reality, that there's this evolution, that there's this movement and dynamism and all of that. And so I want to start to talk a little bit about your most recent book, Evolution in Divine Love. And so I would just like to read two quotes from that, which are right at in the introduction, and then let you go take it from there. But you say, if God and everything connected, well, you talk about these ideas coming in an inner voice, and this is one piece of that conversation that came to you, I guess, internally, where you say, if God and everything connected to the divine is perpetually ever fresh, then every aspect of existence, by its relationship with the sweet absolute, is inherently ever fresh. Whether we speak of God, love, ourselves, or even this world, everything unfolds uniquely in a constantly new, ever expanding manner. Reality is in a state of perpetual evolution. And then you go on to talk about divine love, that love itself becomes an unstoppable force of constant expansion. And God, as the embodiment of this love, then is engaged in perpetual evolution and shaped by this ongoing narrative of sacred love. So, say more about that and just about the core ideas that you've been writing about in this book.
hmm. Well, it's very poetic what you just read, and I don't want to say I'm very poetic, but the theme in itself
Yeah.
demands poetry. And as poetic as it may be, it's again very challenging to embrace it in the day to day, right? Because as we were
Yeah.
talking before, yeah, we can all talk about everything is evolving, but to keep the pace with that ongoing unfolding, sometimes it could be challenging. So I don't want to put
Hmm.
any of my readers into any like fear mode, like this is too much evolution, too much dynamism. And also I talk in my book about changelessness and how there is that principle as well, like these two polarities
Yeah.
are there. But
Right.
mostly, my whole book, Evolution in Divine Love, and as the subtitle also mentions, the eternal becoming of God, soul, and matter. I try to,
Mm.
from the perspective of my Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition, but also again, connecting with thinkers like Whitehead and Taylor Desjardins and many others, I try to make the case for, okay, again, we are agreeing in so much of this cross culturally, cross religiously,
Hmm.
And yeah, we have the idea of a divine that is static or changeless. God is always God. In that sense, it never changed for us, at least. But also, there's a dynamism to the divine, a dynamism to everything, connection to that source. And one of the main reasons why I wrote that book, because to be honest, I cannot write a book about something that I'm not like concerned about or passionate about. I cannot just professionally write a book about something that someone asks me to write. I mean, I could,
Huh?
but it wouldn't feel like me.
Right.
So for me, I felt this necessity in my own community, but also beyond, but also locally, that many times practitioners tend to conceive whether the divine love, ourselves and our potential, or especially sometimes the world of matter in quite non-dynamic ways. And that affects how they practice their spiritual life, how they live their daily life in a very unexciting way, so to say. Like everything is very formulaic, compartmentalized, put in boxes, and there's no wonder. And eventually that creates lots of difficulties for people to find enough reasons for them to continue wanting to practice, embrace their tradition because they feel drained or suffocated or bored.
Right. Yeah.
So for me, it's more like an exploration how to rediscover uh, our own traditions by the grace of sister traditions and in ways that
Hmm.
remain always open, no? That there is a disclosure rather than a closure, especially with spiritual ideas. We may easily become tempted to like reach this conclusive, absolutistic notion. This is like this because God said it, this book says it, and there's nothing else to talk about it.
Yeah.
So while it should be the opposite, actually, we are dealing with the infinite. So there is place for always something new, some new unfolding. We should always remain childlike, learning students forever. And that's all
Mhm.
throughout every sacred scripture.
Yeah.
But sometimes we may miss those sections. So I felt the need to, okay, let's write the book and bring evidence from my own tradition, other traditions, and focus on this principle of evolution and dynamism. So we can remain really aware, okay, this is really all throughout sacred traditions,
Yeah.
and it's inviting me to live a life of yeah, constant disclosure, exciting unfolding basically.
Yeah. So uh in terms of how does that then help you to come alive, to be a better human? Like how does this perspective bear fruit in your actual life or anyone's actual life?
Yeah. Well, I always like to always start thinking in terms of relationships because as process thought as well will emphasize everything is relational. So
Hmm.
relationality is like very an embedded principle of reality. So everything is interconnected, interrelated. Everything is, as I like to say, reality is dialogical, right? Everything
Right.
is in genuine conversation with everything else.
Yeah.
So if I even in principle, if I acknowledge we are in constant growth and movement, we are never the same that 1 minute ago. I'm not taking for granted anything or nor anyone. So if I'm relating to
Mm.
you, okay, I may say, oh, I know Sheri for this amount of years, and there may be the tendency or the temptation of putting people into boxes and then
Right.
objectify them, like make them objects. But if I know we are fluid entities and beings, that even that theoretical reminder will like make bring me back to coherence again. And I'm dealing with someone who is moving like a river, right?
Mm.
You bathe in a river, you always name the river, as I like to say, with the same name, but the river is never the same, right?
Right.
You can never bathe twice in the same waters, as they say, but you call the river
Yeah.
the same name. So I can call
Right.
you Sheri, you can call me Swami, but we are always in our relation, we are always bathing, so to say, in each other's current, which is ever new.
Yeah.
So for me, that keeps things very open, and it's a very sobering, humbling reminder, and even how I relate to myself, because sometimes we are our own
Mm.
worst judges, and we put ourselves in very
Right.
small boxes, and to have this idea that we are beings that are in constant unfolding with a wonderful potential, it's it gives a lot of hope. That will be one word for me, like hopefulness.
Mm.
The midst of hopelessness that comes on a daily basis okay, which ideas can we bring to the table as sacred reminders to keep hopefulness in place? So
Mm,
the openness that this type of ideas give to me is like, yeah, it's always a very bright horizon, even on a cloudy day that I may be going through internally.
right.
Bringing these ideas back, yeah, it's very aligning back like GPS, recalculating, right?
Yeah. Right.
Recalculating, going back on track,
Recalculating.
going
Yeah.
back on track.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's like there's this constant process of recentering within the movement,
yeah,
which is again, you brought a paradox earlier. It's very much like that there's a centering or a grounding, we could say, but it's always within a flow.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, like a dance. You are dancing, but you need like a fixed stage to dance on. So there is something that
Right.
needs to be fixed, changeless, stable. And from there is a constant movement. And in the movement, you may fall to the ground, but like Father Richard Rohr will say, you can fall upward if you want always. There's
Uh-huh.
any falling doesn't necessarily mean falling down. You can always fall upward. So yeah, I've seen myself many times in relationships falling into this pattern of judging people, putting them into boxes, or doing that with myself, like going to the usual places and conclusions,
Yeah.
and go and rebooting and pressing this button and reminding, no, no, we are beings in an ongoing evolution. I shouldn't take myself nor everyone, nor what to speak of God, the divine, the infinite, for granted. There's always something new to be learned here. So
Mm.
enter back into your student seat, so to say, and learn from reality.
Ah,
Yeah.
wow, that's beautiful.
And it's not easy, right? I'm never using the word easy as I like to say,
Right.
but it's not impossible either. Sometimes I like to say the opposite of easy is impossible, and difficult is just the middle point.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point.
Yeah. Easy and impossible. Both of them are frustrating in their own ways. If it's easy, it's
Right.
boring. If it's
Right.
impossible, it's frustrating, but difficult is challenging enough to grow, to change. So that's the middle
Yeah.
path we want to thread, actually.
Right. Perfect. Well, let's pause there for this first half of our discussion, and then in the deeper dive, we'll get into more. I want to get into a little bit more of some of the ideas about matter and the divine in your book. So let's pause here.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening to the first half of this episode. If you'd like to go deeper, click on the link in the show notes to access the full episode for paid subscribers of The Sacred Everywhere on Substack. And if you enjoyed this conversation, please like, subscribe, and share this episode far and wide. I'd love your help to grow this channel. Until next time, may you notice the sacred everywhere.